Welcome back everybody to another MOTOBOB video, and this week KTM have got a new Supermoto, there's a new, more sporty electric street bike from Livewire, Cardo have launched a very interesting looking new feature for their mesh technology which I'll certainly be using, and then there's a bit of a U-turn from Triumph with the Tiger 1200, new tech for any bike from Garmin, and then potentially, finally, an update for Honda's mighty Goldwing. But before we get underway, a quick bit of housekeeping. You see, from now on, I'm going to try and condense the week's news into a single video on a Friday or Saturday, as opposed to how we've been doing it before, where we do individual videos for every single press release that comes out. It means that I can just focus for the rest of the week and just cover all the news stories on a Friday. But then also, for you guys, it means there's just one place to get all of your motorcycling news instead of having to keep up with multiple uploads. Now, if this video does absolutely terribly, I'll probably switch back. But I'd also love to get your thoughts down in the comments if you do watch this one through. Do you prefer to have one quick whistle-stop tour, or did you prefer how I was doing it before, where there was more detail on individual uploads? Let me know what you think in the comments. But let's dive into some of the big news stories of this week, and I think it's fair to say that the main one comes from KTM with the unveiling of their new 390 Supermoto, which also comes in a 125 version. Now, on the one hand, these are brand new, so it's always good to see new bikes on the market and more options for us to choose from. But on the other, well, it's not a particularly surprising build, this one, and you could probably roughly guess how it's spec'd even just from the name. You see, the 390 engine is effectively the same liquid-cooled single-cylinder LC4C that you'll see in all their other 390 bikes, just with some little tweaks for emissions. They've refined the gearbox a touch and shaved a little bit of weight off the exhaust system. Despite that, you're still getting the same 44 horsepower peak and 39 newton meters of peak torque. And they say the steel trellis frame is also largely shared with the small capacity Dukes. They've just had to make a few changes like the foot peg position, the subframe mounts. They've changed the head angle to get the handling right and the swing arm. But broadly and structurally, it's very much the same. Brakes are from Vibro with a 4-piston radial caliper up front like the other 390s. Suspension is from their in-house WP brand from their Apex lineup like the other 390s. And then visually, it's orange, it's angular, it's graphical, like the other 390s, although to be fair, you could probably say the same of pretty much any other bike in the KTM lineup. What does make this one a little bit different though from other bikes in the 390 range is the fact that you've got that taller Supermoto stance with the extra travel in the suspension, the open Supermoto style riding position with the long saddle and 860mm seat height, the spoked 17-inch rims front and rear that will give you that road focused handling even though you've got a fairly lofty chassis. And then in the cockpit, well, they've made a bit of a change here in that they've slimmed down the dash. It does still allow you to control stuff like there's a couple of riding modes, ABS settings, TC settings and connectivity and a few things like that, but it's just really slimmed down to give it that cleaner, dirt bikey look in the cockpit, as you'd expect to be fair for a Supermoto. As for the price on this one, well, it looks fairly decent at £5,699, and I guess one of the reasons they've been able to hit a price point like that is the fact that while it's designed in Austria, the build, in terms of manufacturing, is carried out on their behalf in India by Bajaj, which has been the case for some time now with all the 390 models and below. Still, for the money, it looks like decent value. Certainly a good option if you want a Supermoto-style riding experience, but maybe with a touch more refinement and being a bit more toned down than something that's directly derived from an actual dirt bike. And also, it had me thinking it would probably be a heck of a city commuter. There's enough punch from the engine, for example, but it's still relatively fuel efficient being a 390. The weight is slender at about 160 kilograms wet. The body of it is narrow, so it should be really easy to thread through traffic. And also you've got those big wide bars for plenty of leverage and also the quick turning of that 17-inch front wheel. For me, it sounds like good fun. And the only downside is I have to mention the usual disclaimer, I guess, when it comes to new KTMs at the moment, which is that the company itself is in some fairly serious financial difficulties, and so you probably want to see how those pan out over the next month or two before you rush out and put a deposit on a bike like this. I did see a article on a website that said it's a great time to buy a KTM because they've got so much surplus stock that they're being heavily discounted, and so you could get the bike of your dreams at a really good price at the moment. But of course, you probably want to be sure that you can still get parts and servicing and stuff like that if you're going to spend a load of money on a brand new bike. Personally, I really hope it gets sorted soon. I think the motorcycle world would be a much worse place without KTM. They make such lively, fun to ride bikes. And of course, you never really want to see loads of jobs at risk, and so hopefully they find a way out of this situation soon, whatever form that may take. Moving on though, we've got another new bike. This time it's electric and it's from Livewire, and it's called the S2 Alpinista. So it's based upon, of course, their S2 platform, which already has bikes like the Del Mar and Mulholland. Now the Del Mar is a bit of a flat track style bike with slightly oversized wheels front and rear. The Mulholland is more cruiser inspired, and so it gets a big front wheel and a little one at the rear. But this Alpinista, well, it's meant to be like a standard sporty naked bike, and so naturally it's got 17 inches front and rear. And while I'm sure there's more to it than that, there's probably changes to the geometry, for example, to get the desired handling. You know, the wheel sizes do give you a rough indication of the relative personalities of these three models. Now this one could be a really good bike to ride because I'm led to believe that the S2 Del Mar, from speaking to other people in the motorcycle press, is absolutely brilliant and surprisingly quick. This should be more of the same because it shares a lot of the platform, but potentially a little bit more flickable and agile owing to the fact that it does get those smaller cast wheels. As for whether it'll be a commercial success or not though, rather than just a success in terms of handling, well, I'm a little bit less sure when it comes to that. It feels like it's probably going to suffer from the same problems as the original Livewire, which was also marketed more so as a rural Sunday blast kind of bike than the city focus of something like the S2 Del Mar. It's not just in the way that they've marketed these bikes, because one of the reasons they gave the S2 Del Mar those bigger flat track style wheels was to give it better rolling over rough surfaces like broken tarmac and speed bumps and stuff like that you might find in the city. And it's in that sort of context that electric bikes are able to perform to their best. The range is 120 miles in the city, they claim, and that's as a result of the speeds being lower and also the regeneration that you get when you slow down. And look, journeys are generally shorter in the city anyway, and so for a lot of people that could be a whole week of commuting, and then you can just charge it up at the weekend. The problem comes when you start to market it as a bike that's for riding out of the city, where the range drops to 70 miles, and that's quoted at a constant speed on the highway of 55 miles per hour. And I'm guessing most of you probably don't stick to 55. Realistically, that's nowhere near enough for those fun Sunday rides, and I think they've kind of anticipated that that's going to be one of the possible objections from anyone thinking about buying one, because of this feature they've included on the product page on their website, which shows you what level of charge you get if you were riding out to a given radius from some of the major cities in the UK. Now, on the one hand, it kind of does its job because it shows that you can get out of the city within a charge. But on the other, well, it's like, if you go beyond that 50% line, you're going to have to charge somewhere away from home to make sure you can get back. And also some of the more common routes like London to Brighton, a bit of a favourite with London bikers. Well, it looks like it's right on the edge of that 25% line, and so you might not be entirely confident, especially if you're not sticking to 55, that you can make it without having to stop en route for a charge. So yeah, a bit of a mixed bag, this one. I'm sure it'll be great to ride, great handling and lots of fun, and there's so much torque and acceleration with electric motors. But then there's also the price. Just over 17 grand for either the Del Mar version or the Alpinista, which maybe doesn't look too bad when you consider how much it's come down from the 25 grand or something of the original Livewire, but does look pretty bad for the Alpinista when you compare it to other petrol bikes that are made for a similar purpose, like an MT-09 or a CB1000 Hornet. On top of that, I'm thinking about the Instagram Q&A last week from BMW CEO Marcus Flash. We covered it in last week's video, where he got asked, as one of the questions from the audience, whether they had any plans over the next year or two to build something in the electric market that's not just for urban mobility. He said there's no demand for that kind of bike. I guess because of the range and stuff. And so they're going to stick to focusing on stuff like the CE04 and CE02, which are effectively just electric scooters built specifically for town. If the CEO of, one of the biggest motorcycle manufacturers in the world is saying it's not on their radar at the moment, then it probably doesn't look great for this. But still, I'm willing to give it a chance if I can get hold of one for review, and I'd love to know what you think of it down in the comments below. Does it look like the most desirable looking electric motorcycle that's been announced so far, and is that price getting low enough to make you even want to consider one? Or is the range situation still too much of a hassle to even think about it? Let me know what you think down below. Moving on though to a bit of free tech that I think we can all get on board with, and that comes in the form of a new software update for Cardo's main headsets in their Pack Talk lineup, which should be available from the first quarter of 2025. There's lots of stuff bundled in here, like it's going to take it from 15 people in a group ride to 31. They've got a new private chat feature. They've got voice over IP, so you can do communications over distance, assuming you've got a decent data signal on your phone. But the one that really interested me is called Public Mesh. This basically means you can ride around with your headset tuned into this public mesh setting, and that'll mean you can directly talk to anyone that you encounter out on the road who also has their Cardo in this mode. For me, I think it could be a lot of fun and help to grow that sense of community when you're out riding. I go out a lot on my own as well in the weeks because I'm out filming and stuff like that. And so I reckon I'll definitely switch this on because I'd love to have a few more different chats throughout the day. And it's nice to bump into people from time to time and mix up those long slogs when you're out just filming for an entire day. Or are we bikers actually quite boring? Might be for the best not to be able to speak to each other if someone just starts listing off all the bikes they've owned or something like that. At least you can just pretend your battery's gone flat and switch your Cardo off. But if you see me out in the southwest, definitely switch it on and we can have a chat. And also, I'd love to say a massive thanks to Cardo for supporting the channel and making videos like this one possible. Cardo make our comms units of choice. We specifically use the Pack Talk Edge and Pack Talk Pro, both of which have brilliant audio quality, the great mesh communication system. And with the Pro, you also get this brilliant crash detection feature, which is a really nice peace of mind. So do check out the link down in the description below to find out more. And I'd also like to add, they're running a Your Ride, Your Charge campaign at the moment, which is to kind of celebrate the headspace that you get from going out and riding your bike. So do go and check out that hashtag over on Instagram to find out more and maybe share your ride and your charge. Now, next up, we got some spy shots this week in the form of an update from Triumph on the Tiger 1200. And like I said at the top of the video, I think it signifies a little bit of a U-turn on the technology front. You see, this particular generation of the Tiger 1200 launched a couple of years back with a ground-up redesign that made significant changes to pretty much every part of the bike. So the engine was overhauled, the chassis was brand new, visually is very different as well, and also it got a massive boost in terms of technology. The only thing that kind of surprised me about it was the fact that they didn't fit it with radar tech at both ends. It seemed like all of the competition was doing so, with bikes like the KTM, the Ducati with the Multistrada, and soon after that the GS, all being available with active cruise control and a full suite of radar-enabled rider aids. The current generation of Tiger 1200 just has a radar at the rear for blind spot warnings, and Triumph said this was an intentional choice because when they spoke to potential customers for a Tiger 1200, they only wanted blind spot warnings and nobody really wanted active cruise control. Triumph said, what's the point in adding to the complexity and cost of the bike if you're only adding features that nobody actually wants to use? Now, I will say that does kind of tally with what I see in the comments of our videos on reviews of bikes that do have active cruise control. There's a handful of people who like the look of it and say they'd probably use it, but the majority don't really seem to want to hand over all that control to the electronics and just don't want their pure riding experience to be interrupted by loads of tech. I even ran a poll this week on our community tab to say, of these recent technology features on bikes, which one would you choose? And active cruise control was by no means in the majority, and a lot of people in the comments said just no tech at all, please. So I find it kind of interesting to see these new spy shots, which show pretty much the same bike as the current Tiger 1200. It's got the same looking engine. I'm sure there's maybe little performance tweaks here and there, but the chassis looks the same. Visually, a lot of the panels look the same. And really, the only key difference is a bit of a cutout in the windscreen to accommodate a new front-facing radar. Does that mean mean that Triumph were wrong and that people do actually want this feature? Or have the other manufacturers like BMW and KTM and Ducati kind of created the demand in the market by forcing this tech into their new bikes? I'd love to know what you think down in the comments as to whether you'd expect this on a large adventure bike and whether you might change your mind about some of this tech as it becomes more normalized and more common. Elsewhere on the bike, like I say, there's not a great deal changed in these spy shots, although I will say they have neatened up the back end. They've moved away from that massive rear radar to something that's tucked away under the luggage rack. And also, well, they've introduced another controversial feature, and that's that they've got rid of the tail light and brake light that used to be just above the number plate, and it looks like integrated them with the indicators. Now, undoubtedly, it looks a lot more tidy at the back, this update, but I know that a lot of people are skeptical about those lights and how visible they really are. So again, I'd love to know, is that something you prefer, or just stick with a regular old, highly visible central tail light? But look, Triumph did say their research showed that blind spot warnings are widely wanted and appreciated, and it looks like you could soon fit them to any bike, be that a new bike or old, with this new product from Garmin that they announced at CES, or the Consumer Electronics Show, which was this month in Las Vegas. Now, Garmin have had a similar product to this for bicycles for some years now. It's called the Varia. It's a little pod that you attach to your seat post with a radar integrated, and it can talk to the Garmin head unit on your handlebars and let you know if someone's coming past you or sitting in your blind spot. And from what I can gather, I cycle a bit, people who have these really do seem to like them, so I guess it works. And this, the Zumo R1, basically looks like an evolution of that with some more features to make it motorcycle appropriate. Effectively, what you've got is the little radar at the back that's checking for vehicles around you, which sends an alert to these two little LED pods that you mount on your mirror mounts, which is a really nice, clean way to do it and also makes them highly visible. Then they say it can also show you a visual sort of graphical display of where those vehicles are sitting if you pair it with either a smartphone with the app, or you can use one of their navigation devices if it's one of the compatible models. And then there's a little light on the radar itself which lights up to try and alert the driver if it thinks they're getting a little bit too close. Personally, I really like this because it puts more of the onus on the driver to properly pay attention rather than the biker always having to take evasive action when it's someone else that's being potentially absent-minded. What I think is really neat about this one though is the fact that they've made it quite subtle and sleek, and so it doesn't necessarily make the back end of the bike look terribly ugly, which is often a bit of a compromise when it comes to some of these aftermarket parts, and it's certainly a lot neater than that massive radar on the current gen Tiger 1200. As for the price, well, they're saying it'll be $599, which isn't particularly cheap, but it does look really well thought out to me, and I'm definitely interested to try one out. Next up though, the Honda Goldwing. Well, it's probably my favorite big tourer that I've ever had the opportunity to review, with that super smooth engine, the really planted chassis, and also the extreme levels of comfort. But I will say, the last time I rode it, one thing that was starting to feel a bit dated was the sort of technology package. Even the dash, the TFT and the navigation was a little bit slow and old hat feeling, especially when you compare it to some of the latest models like the Skyline OS from Harley, or that really nice big 10-inch TFT display that you get on a lot of the BMWs now. But also on top of that, well, there's a bit of a theme here in that it doesn't have any radars, and while that might not be a deal breaker for some, like we've already said, certainly amongst the adventure tourers, they really are starting to become the norm. But look, there's a great article on Cycleworld here, which I'd recommend checking out. I'll link to it in the description, which basically says that almost all motorcycle manufacturers buy their radar systems off the shelf from Bosch. Honda, though, well, they typically develop all of their safety systems and stuff like that in-house, and so that's potentially why you don't see them on bikes like the Goldwing at the moment, and even stuff like the Africa Twin, just because there's a bit of a lag when you do it yourself. Thing is though, perhaps it's taking even longer because the system that they're apparently working on, or at least according to this patent, is a more complex combination of a radar, a camera, and a LiDAR sensor. This would give them a really comprehensive understanding of everything that's happening around the bike and basically would have them all working together to validate each other. So it should be super accurate and reliable, regardless of the weather conditions or light conditions or range or anything like that. So look, could this be a technical marvel on the way, or is it all getting a little bit too much? Well, I guess that's in the eye of the beholder, but I did really enjoy this comment from a guy called Joe on that article who wishes they'd spend as much time and effort making the air filter a bit easier to service. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Also, I'll put last week's episode on the screen now in case you missed it, so you can give it a click and give it a watch. We focus much more on new bike rumors for 2025, so there's lots of interesting stuff to check out in there. Do hit subscribe if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle news like this right here on MOTOBOB. A massive thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next video.